As we saw from Naheed, Google Play provides great and valuable insights about SDKs. And something that I want to go over today is in Android Studio, we have a number of features that can help you with dependency management. And we'll see how that connects to this integration itself. The three key things that I want to highlight is that we have support for TOML-based Gradle version catalogs, which are a great feature because it enables you to centralize dependency management in a way that is well supported by the IDE. And I'll go into more details on that soon. We also provide lint warnings on build configuration files and on those version catalogs as well. And we also have a tool called the project structure dialog, which is a visual element in the IDE that can show you the different modules in your project and also all of the different dependencies and SDKs that you use in your app. And this is helpful because it can also visually show you the different warnings that apply to each of those dependencies. So now let's dig into the topic of the Gradle version catalogs and centralized dependency management. Hello everyone, good morning, buongiorno a tutti voi. My name is Juan Sebastian Oviedo. I am a product manager in the Android Studio team at Google. I have been in the team for about almost 4 years now, and I've worked on a number of different areas, including the Android Gradle plugin, the deployment experience, and also dependency management, which is the topic that we're going to focus on in today's presentation. And I'm here with...
Hello, everyone. My name is Naheed. I'm a product manager as well. And I've been working on trust and safety and trust and growth, actually, for past 4 years. And on and off, I've been at Google about 8 years. I actually started as a PM on connectivity. And I know that we had a bunch of talks on connectivity yesterday on networking. And then since then, focused primarily on trying to how to keep users safe. But today, I'm here today to talk about SDKs and how app developers can use right SDKs in their apps. Back
Awesome.
to you.
So in today's presentation, we're going to show you how you can take advantage of the integration between SDK Insights from Google Play and Android Studio so you can make informed decisions as you add and use dependencies and SDKs in your apps. But before we go into the details of the signals that are available and how you can use them, let's consider a key element in delivering a great product experience. So to do this, take a moment to remember a time when you were very excited about a specific product or service. This may have been a physical product like a car or a phone, or a digital product like an app or a game. And remember how you learned about this product, how you read about its features, how you envisioned the value that this product was going to bring to you. And then also remember when you actually got this product, you purchased it, and you took it out of the box, you turned it on, you set it up, and you started to use it. For you to get to that point, you had to make the decision to trust that that product was going to deliver on its promise. And you also had to make the decision to trust that the company behind that product was going to give you an experience that was both valuable and safe. So, as we can see, user trust is an essential element in making that great product experience possible. And when we look at this in the context of Android applications, we can see that the same principles apply. And specifically, when we think about Android apps, two areas that are of critical importance to help maintain that trust are compliance and security. Compliance, because it makes it possible for you to follow best practices, and in this case, specifically Google Play policies, so you can deliver an experience that is valuable and safe to your users. And security, because it enables you to know if there are any known security vulnerabilities or risks that could put your users' data at risk, and also your reputation as an app developer at risk. And considering these areas of compliance and security, we also see that they are critical for SDKs and dependencies. And the reason for that is in the average app, over 80% of the code comes from SDKs. And the reason for this is SDKs are very valuable. They can save you a lot of time. They can enable you to deliver functionality much faster to your users, more value through your apps. However, they also come with challenges because many times it can be difficult to know if a particular SDK is safe to use and if its author is trustworthy. So When we consider this element of trust, as we saw earlier, you as the app developers play a central role in making that trust possible by creating great experiences through your apps. And that's how your users can then trust your apps and trust you as the app developer. At the same time, you also need to be able to trust the SDKs that you use in your apps. If there is a break in the trust link between you and the SDKs, that can then have consequences that impact the trust that your users have in you and in your apps. So looking more closely at this topic of trust, we see that it comes up even from the beginning of the SDK journey as you're selecting what SDKs to use. So typically, you'll start by identifying the specific requirements and needs that a given SDK is going to fulfill. Is it going to help you add new functionality? Is it going to enable you to make a process more efficient? And then based on that, you can identify a subset of candidates, SDK candidates. From there, you'll need to assess the commitment to quality from the SDK author. So specifically, how engaged are they with the community? How quickly do they respond to bug reports? How frequently do they release updates? And from there, you also need to understand what it takes to integrate this SDK and any potential performance impact that it could have on your app and your users. Next, you'll probably need to do a more detailed assessment of the reliability and security impact of this SDK. For example, does it introduce any crashes, any instability, anything concerning like that? And as part of assessing quality, you'll also need to take a look into what documentation is available. So you know how to set this up, so how to integrate the SDK, how to maintain that integration going forward, and also, especially if this is a paid SDK, you also want to know what commitments you can count on. For example, if there is an SLA. So throughout this process, you're trying to assess the quality and the safety of this SDK, but ultimately, you're trying to assess if you can trust the SDK and its author. And the goal that we have today with this presentation is to equip you with information and tools that can make it easier for you to assess that question of trust. And with this context, I'm going to pass it over to Naheed so he can go into more details on the signals that are available from Google Play about SDKs.
Thank you. All right, thanks, Juan. So before we jump in, I wanted to kind of try to set the stage and also understand what the audience looks like. So there are these two different ecosystems that are thriving. I want to understand here in the audience, if you are an app developer, I would like to, if you can raise your hands. Almost everybody, somehow. Second, is any one of you building SDKs? Okay, about 20% or maybe 15%. And that 15% is very impactful, as Juan was saying, that is 80% of the code that we see on Android devices from the apps, and that's critical. And so when we look at these two different ecosystems, and then there is a good intersection between the two, and we're trying to figure out that how do we bring these two ecosystems together in a way that there is less friction for you all, and also less friction for the users to make sure that when you go and, as an app developer, when you integrate an SDK, you are picking the right product, high-quality product, a high-quality SDK, and that's not going to crash on the devices, so on and so forth. So for each one of these, we're trying to understand what the needs are. So if you look at app developers' perspective, and Juan kind of alluded to, is this particular version of SDK recommended by the SDK author? I mean, you might go to Maven repo and then pick that SDK from there, but is that the right SDK you should be using? How popular is this SDK? Is it used by other companies or is it brand new? What are the data practices? Privacy and security is an important element of your decision making. How do you make sure that what kind of data practices does this SDKs have? Does this have any security or vulnerabilities? And there are a lot of these kind of questions. The questions could come from the quality perspective, from performance perspective, from compliance perspective, and you have these answers. And you don't want to answer these questions after you have done all the hard work of integrating this app and submit it to the Play Store. And one of the things that we are trying to solve for, and I have been working on this policy space as well on Play Store, is you submit an app on Play Store and then your app gets rejected. And then you have this friction to say, hey, what's going on? And sometimes that issue is because of an SDK that you are using inside your app. And that's super frustrating. And we have heard again and again from app developers that we are not telling enough to the app developers to say what's going on, and that's something that we are trying to improve. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that you are using the right SDKs that don't have this issue in the first place, that you don't run into this brick wall when you are submitting your app to the Play Store. Then when you go to the next one, what are the challenges with the SDK developers? And we're trying to see how we can help you as well. Your challenges are, we talked about this thing about you have to have backwards compat because your customers, your app developers are trying to ship their apps across all these different Android devices. But then you want to keep making sure that your SDKs are also updated to the latest and greatest of what Android has to offer. But you also want your customers to move to the newer target new versions of your SDK versions. So how do we help you getting more and more adoption of your newer versions of your SDKs? How do you deprecate old versions? And that's another thing which is super challenging for SDK developers that, hey, this SDKs, they are just sitting there, and then you need to support it, and that becomes a huge challenge from understanding. Sometimes app developers come to you that, hey, my app is crashing. And most of the time, they're using an old version where you have fixed the bug already. They should be moving to a newer SDK version. And so that's the thing, is that how can we help you work with the app developers, or we can nudge the app developers to move to a newer version of your SDK. How do I communicate directly with Google? This is another challenge that we have heard from SDK developers, because your customers are your app developers who come to the Play Store, they get friction, and they come back to you, and then they say, hey, Play Store rejected me because of issues with the SDK, go fix it. And that's super frustrating because you don't have a channel to communicate directly with Google. And so how can we help you solve that problem? And I think it's in the best interest for everybody in the ecosystem, for us, for the users, for app developers, for SDK developers, that we can resolve the issue when there is no friction as quickly as possible. And then how do I showcase SDK to the app developers as well? There's a discovery problem as well, that as app developers are trying to find out that, hey, this is the need that I have, this is what I'm trying to solve for, which is the best SDK? Should I use an SDK developers want to acquire new customers? How could we help solve that problem? And so what today we're going to talk about, as Juan was saying, is that trying to address this, we have different tools and products for you in trying to solve these issues. So starting from left to right, for SDK developers, we launched this product, which is Google Play SDK Console. But if you're an SDK provider, you can come register, and then you can get a lot of analytics that comes from the apps on the Play Store if the app developers enable, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. So that's one thing we're going to talk about today. Of course, we have Android Studio, which is your IDE that you use for development, both for SDK developers and app developers. We're going to focus on a Google Play SDK Index, which is a discovery tool for app developers. And also, it's a kind of a showcase for SDK developers where they can showcase their SDKs. So that's more like a discovery, and think of it as an index of all the SDKs. And then last is Google Play Console. So we're not going to talk about Google Play Console today, but that's a product that all of you are familiar with, where you can go and submit the apps to the Play Store. So having said that, this kind of sets the foundation for the talk. Let's deep dive into the Play SDK products first. And so the SDK Console is the first one. Now, we understood this challenge that many times SDK developers face this issue, and they don't have visibility of their SDKs being deployed on Android devices. And as Google, we do have telemetry on SDKs on the crashes that are happening on all these devices. And we said, hey, what if we were to bring this information and data to SDK developers to help them? And so this is a product which is, we opened up for all the SDK providers in Google I/O earlier this year. And this is how it works. think of it as a communication channel that didn't exist today, or it was really burdensome for between app developers and SDK developers. So app developers in Play Console, they can just, whenever there are crash reports being presented in the crash analytics in the crash tab in your console, you could go and say that, hey, I would like to share this crash to a SDK developer. Now, this is just click of a button, and this automatically gets shared with the SDK developer. An SDK developer can see what's going on, they can debug the issue, and then they can issue the fix. And then they can say, hey, here is a recommended version for you, the app developer. You should upgrade this to this version. And that's fantastic. This is a brand new communication channel. There's a information sharing and a lot more details that SDK developer is able to get that they can act on. And so this is a button that an app developer would see when there is a crash, when there are crashes on their apps on the devices in the market. And so this is an ANR, and then there is a button which says that share this ANR to the SDK provider. And then SDK provider can send a message back saying that, hey, I looked at it, here is the issue, here's how you can resolve it. And this is fantastic. This is a brand new communication channel. So, and then you can get warnings about all the non-compliant versions as well, as in the Play console. So as an app developer, if there are any issues related to SDKs, you will see that right away in the Play console. Today, there are more than 120 SDK owners who are registered on SDK Console and is open. I would recommend everybody, if you're an SDK provider, please come and register. It's a very valuable service, and it reduces friction with your customers if you're registered on console. OK. So that's that. And this is a link, Google G.co, SDK Console. OK. So going back to this Venn diagram, we talked about SDK Console for SDK developers. Now let's talk about the Google Play SDK Index. So as an app developer, there are the three questions that we talked about. How popular is this SDK? What are the data practices? Are there any security issues? So these are three fundamental questions that you as an app developer want an answer before you make a decision. And the goal is, the way we have designed SDK indexes, think of it as your development journey. There is a before you ship an app, before you actually build an app, before you make a decision to integrate any new feature inside your app, versus the things that after the fact that you have published and you have submitted the app, and then you find out something is wrong with your app. And so what we want to do is that we want to go as early in your developer journey to help you, so that you don't waste a lot of time downstream. So this is the Google Play Index. It's and then I'll do a demo very quickly, because there is nothing better than doing a demo. OK. So this is Google Play SDK Index. There are different categories of SDKs. And let's see if we can pick up a SDK that we can show. How does it look like? So let's say Firebase is an SDK. So there are a few things that some of the questions that we were trying to answer. One is this SDK, who owns it? So there is an ownership here. There's also badging. I talk about that briefly. The Maven ID, the Maven repo, the basic information is there. And then it has stats. And a lot of these stats come from Play Store on the Play apps that we have. And based on that, we'll say that, hey, what does the adoption look like for this particular SDK? What is the retention across different versions of an SDK? The permissions that the SDK is using, the retention, and then different versions. And if there are any policy violations that this SDK has, or they had in the past on previous versions, they will also show up by the version level. So right now, this particular SDK doesn't have any issues, but they also show up here. So that's a high level of an SDK. Let me go back and talk through some of the key features that are important. So that was the SDK. So the first thing is, has SDK provider registered with Google, which is to mean that this SDK has a relationship with Google, and they understand the play policies, and they have communication channel with Google. So if there is an issue that we find with an SDK, we'll directly communicate with the SDK provider and try to resolve it. So what this means is that you as an app developer don't need to go and chase down this SDK provider to go fix issues. And this drastically reduces the time it takes to go from a non-compliant version of an app to a compliant version, because guess what? Most likely that SDK provider has worked with Google and have rectified the issue, and they have published a new version, and there is a version for you to upgrade to. So from the app developer perspective, the only thing they need to do is just to upgrade to a compliant version. This is a lot simpler life cycle than just trying to be frustrated and figuring out that, hey, what is this going on, and then going and trying to ping that SDK provider. And sometimes, and we have heard this from a lot of small developers, if the SDK provider is big, they might not even listen to you, or there might not be easy channel to communicate with them, and that becomes frustrating. So as Google directly reaching out to SDK provider makes it a lot easier. Okay, so SDK details, I shared that briefly here. So you can see the Maven ID, the Maven repo where this SDK is hosted. Data section guidance, this is very important. We try to bring more of the privacy and security and the data practices that SDK has. And sometimes this is hidden. We want to bring this out and make it easy for you to discover. And we did something similar for apps as well on Play Store. For example, on Play Store, we have safety labels or data declarations. And I think one of the other challenges that we have heard that app developers have is that you don't know what data practices SDKs have, what they're collecting, what they're sharing. And we want to make it easy that as an app developer, you understand this so that you can do right declarations on your Play submissions. Okay. Android permissions, this is another thing. You want to understand very clearly that what is this SDK doing? What kind of permissions is it accessing? And we want to make sure that this transparency makes it easy makes it easy for you, but also there is less abuse of permissions. And what I mean by that is that the SDKs are not just collecting data and not telling you, and then you find out, and then it's a surprise. And that surprise is really bad, because that might be bad for the user trust that Juan was talking about, that, hey, why is this app collecting location when it is not accessing, it's not supposed to access location for any of the features it's providing, and that's bad. SDK retention by app. So this is also on an average, how long is this particular, any apps on an average on Play Store, how long are they keeping this SDK? And then by app installs as well, that are the big apps using it or not. So this gives you a very good perspective of how reliable this SDK is going to be. And the API versions as well, minimum API level, I talked about that. I think this is important for you to make sure that all the devices that your users are, is this SDK going to support it or not? And some adoption across the different versions of that particular SDK, so it gets nitty-gritty details about that at a version level as well. So in short, in summary, think of it as an index. It's to make you an informed SDK decision way early in your journey. It gives you some useful insights. It gives you details about the safety, data safety practices, and also the partners that are committed with Google Play policy. Okay. Now, this is great for the journey when you are proactive and you are doing these decisions before you even make a decision. You're making these decisions before you integrate inside your app, I mean. But now, you would say, hey, Naheed, this is great, but this is out of my context. And this is where Android Studio comes in. I said that, hey, we would like to bring this information that's on SDK Index right inside Android Studio in the IDE that you are in day and day out. So I'll hand it back to Juan to continue from here.
So, as you saw, good job, Naheed. As we saw from Naheed, Google Play provides great and valuable insights about SDKs. And you've probably seen things like this in Google Play Console, a warning related to a SDK. And this information is useful, but the challenge is, if this is the first time you're seeing this, it could actually turn out to be a significant delay in your ability to release an update of your app to your users, because you may actually need to move to a different SDK or a different version of this SDK, and that may require a significant rework in your app's code. It also will require additional testing, and it turns out to be a significant delay potentially. So our goal is to enable you to discover these warnings in Android Studio, so you have the opportunity to address them as you're working on developing your apps. And something that I want to go over today is in Android Studio, we have a number of features that can help you with dependency management, and we'll see how that connects to this integration itself. The three key things that I want to highlight is that we have support for TOML-based Gradle version catalogs, which are a great feature because it enables you to centralize dependency management in a way that is well supported by the IDE, and I'll go into more details on that soon. We also provide lint warnings on build configuration files and on those version catalogs as well. And we also have a tool called the project structure dialog, which is a visual element in the IDE that can show you the different modules in your project and also all of the different dependencies and SDKs that you use in your app. And this is helpful because it can also visually show you the different warnings that apply to each of those dependencies. So now let's dig into the topic of the Gradle version catalogs and centralized dependency management. So why is centralized dependency management beneficial? The key benefit is that instead of having your dependency definitions scattered across the Gradle files for your different modules, you can have a single source of truth that you track as you add, update, and remove dependencies. This can make your development process much more efficient and can remove a lot of the anxiety of not knowing if a particular dependency has been updated or if you may have a dependency left in there that you should no longer have in the project. And it comes with, it comes with these benefits, and there have been different attempts to do this in the past before version catalogs. One attempt was to use constants and objects in build source, and this didn't work as well because it wasn't well supported by Android Studio. Basically, if you define definitions, dependency definitions in this way, you could not get lint warnings for those versions because the lint system could not see them, and you could also not see these dependency version definitions in the project structure dialog. Similarly, there was an attempt to do this using extra properties in build.gradle files, and these were supported by the project structure dialog, but they were not supported by the linting system because lint works in a local, line-by-line way, and it could not see those dependency versions. So these two approaches had major shortcomings. On the other hand, with version catalogs, you have the benefits of centralized dependency management, having that single source of truth, and in addition to that, you get IDE support in Android Studio. So you have the ability to get lint warnings, you have support in the project structure dialog, and you also get other benefits, like for example, the ability to get code completion and to navigate from a dependency declaration in your modules build.gradle file to the actual definition of that dependency in the version catalog. So in the end, these benefits translate into increased efficiency gains for you and your team because you have the benefits of the centralized dependency management with the addition of the great IDE support. So what this looks like is you have in the version catalog, you have a top section that defines the versions of your dependencies. Then you have a next section that describes the actual coordinates and the libraries that are used. And you can also use this to define plugins and also bundles. So it gives you really good support to specify the dependencies used by your project across all of your different modules. And then when you look at the build.gradle file for a specific module, instead of seeing the actual coordinates for the dependencies, you'll see references to the version catalog, and you can easily do Control or Command click on one of those to navigate to the actual definition in the version catalog. So, in summary, Gradle version catalogs have a lot of benefits. If you are not using them yet, I really encourage you to check them out and to adopt them. And we actually have a guide on how you can migrate to version catalogs on developer.android.com. You can have instructions on how to do this step by step, so I encourage you to check that out. So now, discussing the specific integration and the support for SDK Insights, as Naheed mentioned, we have different surfaces. We have the SDK Console and the SDK Index. Android Studio gets data from those sources on a frequent basis, and that data is what is used to then display corresponding warnings to you in Android Studio. And the way this works is when you make a dependency declaration, for example, in this case for Firebase Crashlytics and a specific version, we then do a comparison and we check if this data matches any of the warnings in the export that Android Studio got from Google Play. So let's say in this case there was a match, so there is actually a warning that was provided by the SDK author, and it's actually a blocking warning that will prevent you from publishing the app to Google Play. The other thing we do is, in addition to displaying these warnings, we also check if there is any recommended version information. If we have this information, we are going to display it in the warning itself whenever possible, but we are also going to provide a quick fix that you can easily use to move to a version of this SDK that does not have any known issues. So with this context, something else that I want to describe is that we support different types of warnings. The main types are messages from the SDK authors. So as Naheed described, in the SDK console, as an SDK author, you can claim ownership of the SDK, and you can then add notes that, for example, mention, hey, avoid this version because there is a known crash, or other information like that that can help your consumers know that this version should not be used. There are also warnings for outdated SDK versions. These are situations where a version of an SDK is too old and should no longer be used. Some of this could be blocking and could prevent you from publishing to the Google Play console. Some may not. They're still important to pay attention to. The other type is warnings related to Google Play policy issues. So these are situations where the SDK behaves in a way that violates a given policy. So these are also important to pay attention to. And the last category that we recently added support for in a Ladybug feature drop is warnings for security vulnerabilities. So if the analysis process from Google Play detects that there are known security vulnerabilities, that information will also be presented to you in Android Studio. Something else to keep in mind is that there are two types of severities for these warnings. There are non-blocking warnings that are mostly informational. They will not prevent you from publishing your app to the Google Play console, but some of these could become blocking warnings in the future. So they are still important to pay attention to and to understand and address. And the second category is blocking warnings. These are warnings that are much more urgent to pay attention to and address because they will prevent you from publishing, and they need to investigate it as soon as possible. As I mentioned earlier, the other thing we do is we don't just want to tell you that there are issues. We want to give you the tools so you can address them within Android Studio. And the way we do that is, as part of the warning, whenever we have recommended version information, like a version range, we will present that in the warning itself. And we will present a quick fix that points to the highest version in the recommended range. And that quick fix is something that you can easily click on to move that version of the version of the SDK to a higher version that does not have any known issues. So with this context, I'm going to give you a quick demo of what this looks like in the IDE. So if we go to Android Studio here, so something that I want to call your attention to first, this is a simple project that I set up to show you what this looks like, is that when there are any warnings in the IDE related to SDKs that are blocking, you will see a notification that looks like this. It will pop up when you first open the project or when you do a sync after updating dependencies. And what this tells us is that there is one SDK with a blocking warning. When you click on this link to open the project structure dialog, it will take you to the suggestions view in the project structure dialog. And here you'll see a list of all of the warnings that are related to dependencies. Here we can see the blocking one that was reported to us in the notification. It tells us that this was reported as a problematic version and we should be using these versions instead. There's also a link that can take you to the bug report on GitHub where you can get more information about this particular issue. And there's also a warning here that is non-blocking, that is informational, and also tells you that the author recommends using a different version instead. If we click on View Usage, that takes us to the Dependencies view in the Project Structure dialog. And here we can see the same warning as well, along with the ability to update to the recommended version. Now, if we go to the build.gradle file for this module, we'll see that here, as I showed you in the slides, there are no specific coordinates for these dependencies, but you can see the references to the definitions in the version catalog file. So for example, if I do command click on this dependency, it takes me to the actual definition in the version catalog, and we can see the coordinates as well as a version.ref that points to a specific version that is being used for this dependency. So if we scroll up to the dependencies to the version section, we can see that here is the Firebase Crashlytics version. It has the red squiggly line under it, which tells us that this is a blocking issue. And when we hover on it, we can see the details for the warning. There's the quick fix that enables us to move to a version that doesn't have any known issues. And something else that I want to show you is if you click on more actions, there is an option here to view details in the Google Play SDK Index, because this warning came from the SDK Index. And what this will do is it will open the index to the page for this SDK that will look like the demo that Naheed just showed you. So here, going back to the actions, something else that I want to show you is if you go to the problems view, this will also show you a list of all warnings related that are present in the project, which includes the warnings related to the SDK issues. So we have the blocking one here, and we have the informational one here at the bottom. So now, if we click on the quick fix for this to move to version 19.2.1, it bumps us to the higher version. Same for the informational warning, and then we can sync the project to move to versions that don't have any known issues. So it's a pretty quick demo, but what this will do is if there are any warnings, even if they're from any SDK that is part of the SDK console or is tracked by Google Play, you will see those warnings in Android Studio so you can understand them and act on them while you're working on your app in the IDE. So now going back to the slides, let's see. So to recap, as you saw, we have the notification. You'll see this when you open the project and it first syncs and there are blocking issues in the project. You'll also see it after you add new dependencies and you see in the project and there are any blocking warnings. From there, you can go to the project structure dialog, which will show you more information. Will offer the ability to update the dependency version. Then in the dependencies section, you can see the same information as well. And as I showed you in the version catalog file, you can then hover on the dependency version as well. You see the squiggly lines that report that there's an issue. And you can then use the quick fix to update to a higher version. And you can also use the more actions menu to view more details when these warnings come from the SDK Index. So to summarize, the key benefits of this integration is that you have the ability to learn about these issues, to discover them while you're working on your app in Android Studio, which is much earlier than when you're actually submitting your app to the Google Play Console. And you can see this information through the lint warnings and also in the project structure dialog. Also, you can learn about the type of warning that is being reported, if it's an outdated issue, if it's a policy violation, if it's a security vulnerability, and use that information to prioritize and figure out how to address these issues within your team. And then the other benefit is that you can take advantage of the quick fixes to easily move to versions that don't have any known problems. So now, to conclude, the call to action from today is to take advantage of this information so you can make informed decisions as you add and use SDKs in your apps, and also to learn about the type of issues so you can prioritize accordingly. Use this information so you can address these problems within Android Studio much earlier than submitting your app to the Google Play Console. And the last call to action that I want to highlight is if you're not using version catalogs yet, definitely explore them, take a look at them because they come with many benefits. And it's also an area that we support in the IDE with different features like the code completion, the navigation, and also the ability to show you these notifications related to SDKs. So with that, we'll conclude our presentation. We thank you very much for the time. Thank you for this opportunity. And come and talk to us if you have any questions. Thank you.